Welcome back to Ask the Educator, a podcast for all professionals involved in medical device processing and sponsored by Healthmark Industries. The education team here at Healthmark has 280 years of combined experience in areas ranging from sterile processing, endoscopy, OR, biomed, to hospital and industry leadership. Our goal is to leverage our collective experience to answer one of your questions each episode, giving you the practical tips you need to succeed in the evolving world of device processing. My name is Kevin Anderson, clinical educator here at Healthmark, and I will be your host. Let's get started. Hey, welcome back, everybody. This is Ask the Educator podcast with your host, Kevin Anderson. And again, with me, I have Seth Hendy, the educator that's going to help us today with our question. One piece of good news for a lot of departments out there right now is they're looking at opening up business again and getting endoscopy and SPDs up and running a little bit more. And so with that, we have things to take into consideration when it comes to water quality. So Seth, what are the considerations that we needed to get started again?
Wow, that's a great question. And I'm sure a lot of people are asking themselves that question, right? And it's really because of how much water and water quality affects all of those departments. I mean, you SPD, absolutely. Endo units, of course. Your standalone clinics, dental offices, right? Any place that is using water for processing of instruments, for rinsing, for any of those functions, for steam sterilizing, right? Any of those functions that we consider crucial to us, water touches those. And so I'm sure a lot of people are like, wow, what am I going to do? Well, there's water can be tested, and so that's definitely going to be something. Really what we're trying to fight are dead legs. That's that's sort of the common term. A lot of times it's thought of when you close down a unit for reconstruction, a remodel, right? They'll stop all water flow. It stops going to the showers. It stops going to the sinks. It stops all of that stuff. Once that water goes slack, then any treatment that the municipalities are doing starts to go away. All the chlorination and things like that start to fade because it's sitting there. And then anything in the pipe starts to get picked up. And those two things together become the water quality issue that we really worry about. With that treatment going away, we all know the stuff that grows in water, E. coli, Legionella, Pseudomonas, Klebsiella, all of those things can grow there. And so then the real question is, what happens when I turn it back on? What I do find interesting, especially in an endoscopy clinic, is you almost have engineered dead legs when you talk about an AER. An AER in use has things pumping through it all the time. But an AER that stops, where it's not being used, really all of a sudden, where does that water go? Where does everything? And there's feet and feet worth of piping inside those it can be filled with solution.
Yeah, I think that's important because there's some SPDs that have their own AERs, or there's large endoscope reprocessing departments that have a ton of them. And so maybe they don't do the volume that they were doing, but there's still some volume that they've been doing. But now all those machines maybe have been being used a lot less, and maybe they have those dead legs that you're talking about. And there's perfect breeding grounds for all those organisms and could cause some substantial harm, I would think.
Absolutely. If they get into things, as I say, they talk about a remodel. They've had people develop issues from the shower. Without thoroughly flushing the system, the first patients that get put back into a unit, they turn on the shower, and that can be a way of sort of aerosolizing. They get breathed in, and so the same thing in an AER. If it's not rinsing well and your water quality is not good, then if any of that stuff resides in your rinse waters and things like that, then it actually can go into the patient. And that's really what we're trying to avoid. So I would say water sampling is not the hardest thing in the world to do. There are some really simple ones, and I would even suggest, hardness, pH, and alkalinity. Now those don't have to do with bacteria, but you could see if a delay or if a shutdown has affected your water quality that way. And then I'm sure you have a clinical engineer somewhere who's in charge of water in your facility. And that's a person to say, what kind of water testing are we doing? Especially if you experience a complete shutdown, the question to ask yourself is, what do we know about our water as we bring it back up? And if we don't know enough to feel comfortable, then we should test to find out.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought up clinical engineering, because there should be an expert on site that is in charge of all your water sources. Because the bottom line is once businesses are opening back up for reprocessing, the last thing we want is to cause some sort of recontamination of any of our devices that are going to take care of patients. So what else do we think we could do or need to do in order to get ready for business as usual, or at least close to business as usual anyway?
Absolutely. Well, so talking to that clinical engineer, number one, how are our filters, right? So if you have softening systems, if you've got filters in place in your facility, how are those doing? And again,
which your AERs should have filters, right?
Sure. No, absolutely. And that's just for regular. I'm talking about that's your potable water, right? That's your regular water kind of stuff. Are we softening that? Okay. Is that system ready to go? Has there been issues since it was slowed down or since it was turned off? Is that kind of stuff ready to go? Do those filters need to be changed? Then you can do and really ask yourself the same exact question about your critical water. Reverse osmosis is through a membrane, and those have to be changed, right? It's the same thing with your DI. That's on a resin bed. So those two things, if you're saying, okay, my critical water sources, are those functioning and ready to go? Was there any issue with having them shut down? And the reason I say that is because we actually found out that a few AER manufacturers said, hey, if you're going to close your clinic completely, then you might want to uninstall your unit. Now, that's a little more complex than just turning the power off. That requires draining it out, and all of that kind of stuff, because they knew that if those were left slack and to hang out like that, that could be an issue. And so think about your filtering systems the same way. Is there something that I needed to do? And so that's a way to ensure that you're ready to go from point A. Some of the really simple things to do are to run your water. So running some empty cycles, right, in your washers, running some empty cycles in your sterilizer. I live in Vermont. We have a camping season here, right? We've got a lake season that's not December, because that's when it's frigid. And actually, one of the recommendations that they make is when returning to your camp, let the water run, right? Bring that stuff through and let it clean out. And so that's not a terrible idea for your department. Run some empty cycles and get some fresh water through your system.
No, that makes sense. And who knows, you might come up with PM messages that come up on some of the equipment. It is something else that we do, to a lesser extent with our eyewash stations. Same principle is sort of applying now to all of this other equipment that's been sitting and not doing anything. But I really think that we need to really look, especially at those AERs and, even our sterilizers are using steam that's, coming from whatever source. And just like you said, those critical water sources as well, whether it's DI or RO, that's a lot of different things to think about. But I think it's very important given the level of risk that could possibly be involved depending on how long your machines have been down, right?
Absolutely. I'm glad that you brought up eyewash stations, because we think of those as a simple thing, and a lot of people understand that it should run for a little while. And so you're really making something now take that thought. Everyone goes, yes, I totally understand that kind of concept, and just start applying it to some bigger machines that normally we wouldn't have to, but we're not exactly in a normal time right now. And so those kind of really simple solutions and some simple tests. What's in my water? Do I feel good about it? And if you do, you're ready to reopen. You're ready to get going again.
Thank you, Seth. Yeah, lots for people to think about as they reopen. Don't forget about your water quality on any end of the SPD spectrum, whether it's at the beginning when you're washing, whether it's your critical water or the water that's going to your washers and as it's softened. Let's get into those AER IFUs, find out what we need and what is required of us before we get up and running with those full steam. Thanks, Seth, for joining me. I think we have given our listeners a lot to think about as they address water quality on their way back to ramping up business.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right, everyone, just to quickly recap, surgical team members, they're going to be excited to get back to doing what they do to serve the patients. But it is important to ensure that you are ready to safely resume operations. Water quality is critical in all aspects of device processing, so before you get back to business as usual, remember to check out the following items. Check potable water, critical water, and washer water for pH, alkalinity, and hardness. Check critical water and water softeners for any needed PMs. And check your AERs for any filters that need to be changed, and check their IFUs to see if there's any additional considerations to bring the AER back into service safely. Lastly, check out the AAMI Technical Report, TIR 34. This document explains everything you need to know about water quality. I hope that this episode was a helpful reminder to you. Please check out our other episodes wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a rating and a review. And thanks again for listening. All opinions expressed on this show are those of the presenters. Before using any medical device, it is important to review the device manufacturer's instructions for use.